Hi, and welcome to Alert and Oriented, Whitman Partners platform for lifelong learning. Today, we have a special guest. We're welcoming recognized expert Susan Broussard. The most important thing, professional work related, that you know about Susan is that her daughter played competitive tennis. And so we built a bond with Susan through her daughter's high school and then through college. And so, Susan, if you just want to talk about tennis, that's a-okay with me. In all seriousness, though, today Susan is going to talk to us a little bit about mentoring the junior OR director, the OR manager that has been promoted. Now we have seen that something like 37% of our open vacancies for directors of surgical services are filled by the promotion of an internal. And we know what their turnover rates are. We heard HCA's number. We had heard once it was 18 months of a turnover for a director of surgical services. I think Susan might have heard that it's even more rapid than that. So we'll talk about that too. As far as our audience, welcome to Alert and Oriented. If you have a question, please raise your hand. If you want to ask the question in the comments, that's great. I'll be the mouthpiece in that circumstance. We'll save some time at the end for questions. But Susan, I have got 8 topics that I want to get to, questions prepared. So why don't we get right into it? Welcome, Susan. Why don't we start? Will you tell us a little bit about your background and how that resulted in your role now as a road warrior for hospitals and operating rooms across the country? Welcome, Susan Broussard.
So thanks so much, Josiah, for having me. I've been a nurse for 36 years and in the OR for 35. So I've spent my entire life in an operating room. And I remember when I was a senior in college doing my senior leadership, and I had the opportunity to do it in the OR. And I knew that's where I wanted to be. And sadly, back in my day, they didn't let new grads go into the OR. So I had to go do my year in an ICU. I'm just not a floor person. It's just not my jam. And I knew that.
Right.
So I worked in a post-open heart ICU for a year. And back in the day, they had the old-fashioned Periop 101. It was sit in a classroom for 6 months and then hit every specialty. And then you became an OR nurse in the spot where they put you in. Because back in my day, someone had to either move or pass away before a position was open. That's not that way anymore. So, and I've always been a scrub. I'm from the generation that you learned how to scrub first, and I did that. And hearts was my thing. I scrubbed hearts for a good 15 years. And while I was at Texas Heart, scrubbing and RNFA and all that fun stuff, I had the opportunity to apply for an assistant nurse manager position at Texas Heart. And thinking, oh gosh, I don't want to go into management. I'm going to scrub and for the rest of my life. Well, the older you get, the more you don't want to be on your feet for 10 or 12 hours a day. And I said, and my husband's the one that talked me into it. He's like, you need to apply. Yeah. So I applied and got the position, and the rest is history. Took some time off when our girls were born and when they were little. But I've been directoring since about 1999 and really on the road for the last 10 years, almost 11, and have been in a lot of different places. And, this whole concept kind of has been birthed because of my experiences that I've seen on the road. And it's changed a lot in over 20 years of being a director. And in 25 years of leadership, it's changed a lot. So I think this is the time to have these discussions.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So you say that when you first came up, it was through passing away that opened up the position here. You've been in it for, my quick math, 22 years. How has the director of surgical services role changed, and how does that play into why the turnover is so great right now?
Well, I think it's just a whole different world. I think the OR is much more complex than it was back in my young days. I think back when I was a staff nurse doing hearts, I mean, we had one pan of instruments, a retractor, a saw, and or an IMA retractor and some delicates, and we were done.
Right.
And now you look at cases where you've got 25 or 30 pans of instruments for a case, and you've got these young kids who are coming up out of tech school and new nurses coming through Periop 101. Their eyes are just like, what on earth have I gotten myself into? It's just very complex. I think the cases and the patients are much more complex. You know, we're seeing much sicker patients now too, which makes the case more difficult and more challenging, where nurses maybe don't have the critical thinking skills that the old timers like myself may have had back in the day. Just because they're pushing kids through nursing school and getting them out into practice. And I think having an electronic medical record has taken away our ability to critically think on our feet.
Mm.
And I think the directors of old were a lot like I am now. I've really patterned myself after some of my former directors when I was a young kid, where no matter what it was, they knew how to do the case, how to help, how to be a part of the team. And I think what's happening now is there's so much emphasis on metrics and meeting this, that, and the other. And it makes it difficult for directors to juggle it all. First of all, you're struggling with staffing.
Mhm.
Everybody in the country is struggling with staffing. I just left an assignment in Florida, and pretty large, busy organization. I was 90% travelers
Mm.
and running 6 people through Periop 101. And I'm having to have my travel staff orient my new staff, which
Mhm.
is tough. And that's tough on
Right.
the new periops too.
Right.
So I just think generationally things are different. Folks in my generation, you know, I bought my first house with call and overtime. People
Mhm.
don't want that now. They want work-life balance. So you've got to be able to reach people where they're at. That is the one thing that most people who have worked with me know, is my catchphrase. You've got to meet people where they're at in their careers and what they want. And that's the one, there are so many intangibles that you aren't taught as an OR director. And that's kind of where this has birthed from.
Got it. So what we're seeing is some specialization, 24 trays where it used to be one. We're seeing EMRs. People are more specialized and more siloed and don't have sort of quite the same big picture that that you had due to your history and your experience. And I like that phrase, meet people where they're at. Um, so the way that we have typically asked a recognized expert that makes themselves available for consulting is we've said, what is your passion? What do you want to do over and over? And you were very clear. I want to mentor the OR director. You could have seen it a million different ways. Periop 101, mock surveys. You could have seen it in OR efficiencies, but you said OR mentoring the junior leader, that's my passion. Why? Tell me a little bit about why that really speaks to you.
It goes back to when I was scrubbing and really working in the rooms. This was very long. This is 30 years ago. I remember I had a group of scrub tech students and nursing students that came through, and because I love to teach, I guess that's maybe I should have been a teacher maybe I was a teacher in a former life. I love it. It just drives me to be able to teach people. And I got 2 years in a row the Preceptor of the Year award. And that was voted by the students and my peers and new employees that I would work with. So I think that really drove who I am as a leader, because if you don't teach and you don't be a part of the solution, then you're going to go nowhere. And I just think that's the one thing I've learned over the years is that I have to meet people where they're at, and then I have to find out what drives that person, because maybe it's, I need to be out at 3 o'clock. I have a young lady, young scrub tech student. she had to be out at 3 o'clock to pick her kids up, because if she was 5 minutes late, she was paying another $20. Well, when you're a baby scrub tech student just out of school, you got to think about that.
Right.
And if I hadn't have talked to her about her shift, that would have been an issue for her, and maybe she wouldn't have stayed with us.
Right.
So you have to really understand your team,
Mhm.
and it takes a lot of time. And I love to take someone and mold them. And I use that analogy to meet them where they're at, as to see where they are in their life. What do they want to be when they grow up? Where do they see themselves 1 year, 3 year, 5 year? And then maybe I can impact that. So when I come into an organization as an interim, they aren't bringing an interim in because things are great, right? You're bringing an interim in to save the ship. It's
Mhm.
sinking rapidly. Help me. And then when I get there, I'm meeting the educator or the clinical coordinator or the manager or whoever, or the service line coordinators, whoever they have in place. And oh my goodness, most of them are either very tenured, they've been
Mhm.
there a long time, and they've got a really garbage attitude. Let's face it, we've all seen that. Or they're so brand new, they don't know what they don't know. So you've got two factions meeting, and sometimes it's not always harmoniously.
Right.
So I think when you've got people like that, you have to bring them together. You've got them to get them to realize that this is the leadership team, not the leadership I or the leadership me. Um, so that's my passion. I love bringing a team together, and I start with my leadership team, and then I bring in the whole team. And I think that makes it so much better when you have everybody on the same page. Everybody knows what each other's responsibility is. I can do your job, she can do mine, that kind of thing. It's shared responsibility. And that's how I've always managed to bring a team in when I'm new and I have to assimilate myself very quickly into the environment so I can make an impact quickly.
So that's very interesting. So um, in that vein, um, mentoring or training, professional development, some look at that as sort of a human resources function. Others, the chief nursing officer or the boss of the director of surgical services, that might be his or her function.
Sure.
Still others, educating, you talked about education, might be a perioperative educator. Yet for some reason, we're just not, the dots aren't connecting. On the job training is not getting it done. What
Right.
is it about what you do that is different from what might be a human resources or the CNO or the nurse perioperative educators opportunity, responsibility?
I'll just speak from being a new person in the organization as an interim. I ask for meetings with key stakeholders, and we're talking from C-suite executives all the way down to housekeeping.
Mhm.
I need to understand who my players are.
Mhm.
And sometimes I don't think I'm not seeing that, because oftentimes I'll overlap whoever they hire for the position, and I don't always see that. That the new director coming in or the new VP or whatever the title would be for the position, they're not always given that. It's just get in and start working.
Right.
And I feel that that's not how you do it. You've got to get to know your team, because if your team knows who you are as a person, um, and then you know what you have to do, what are the biggest pain points that your staff says are big pain points, and what your physicians say are pain points, and what your executive team says are your pain points.
Mhm.
They're all different. And then you've got to prioritize that, and then give the new director the opportunity to put a 1 month, 3 month, 6 month, 1 year game plan together, something that is tangible that they can say, I did this. Because I think when you're bombarded with all of this technology, with this report and that report, and all of the things that go along with the EMR, you get lost in the numbers.
Mhm.
And you forget that there are people on the receiving end of everything that is being pushed upon them.
Mhm.
Um, so I think for me, it's the first thing is getting to know who my team is.
Mhm.
who is my leadership team, and trickle it down to who is everybody within the department. Spend time. And that's why one of the first things I want to do when we're mentoring new leaders is get them in the departments, seeing what the operation is, learning how things are going, and learning how things aren't going, because almost what's not happening is almost as important as what is happening.
That's
And
interesting. Oh,
no, go ahead.
that's interesting. That's interesting because if I understand you correctly, you're going to them, because my next question is, some systems, HCA, I think has one, maybe, I'm not sure if Common Spirit, but some systems
Sure.
have a leadership university. Come to Leadership University in Nashville for 6 months, and you're coming to us, and we're going to put you into a leadership methodology and a framework. And I don't know if that is a successful or not, but what I'm understanding clearly, the difference is Susan goes to you, and you can't do that with that HCA model of the Leadership University, if I understand that correctly.
Well, it's interesting because I've had the opportunity to go through OR University at HCA.
Okay.
And I've also have a very close friend who went through the Director of Development program at HCA.
Excellent.
And when I looked at the curriculum and when I went through OR University, it's very nuts and bolts.
Okay.
And that's fine that you can read a report and know how to get a report. And yes, you need to have the numbers to be able to make decisions on your business, because what you're doing is running a business.
Right.
In the operating room, a business with people, right?
Right.
And the one thing that they don't teach you is how to deal with the difficult situations, how to deal with a difficult surgeon, how to deal with a difficult staff member, the human piece of that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really important because, as we all know, in this world that we're in right now, and having been in leadership a long time, and this is the one thing I've seen change a lot, is people are more willing to go down the road for 50 cents more an hour as a staff person rather than stay. And they don't leave because they don't like the organization. They leave because of leadership. I've
Right.
heard that over and over and over again over the years.
Right.
And I take that very seriously, because I think that's the piece that's missing from the nuts and bolts. It's fine to do the A, B, C, D, E, F, G. You got to cross off those boxes. But you need someone who has been in the trenches, who has been in that scenario that is driving you absolutely bananas at this moment in time.
Right.
And you don't know how to respond to it. So that's where someone like me comes in. I like to tell my team I've made every mistake in the book at least twice.
Right.
You know, because you do. You got to learn from your mistakes. Okay, I'm going to respond differently the next time this scenario happens. And then it comes into my head, and sure enough, I'll respond differently. And then I take that and I file it away, and okay, this is the best way to handle this type of surgeon, this type of case, this type of situation with an employee. And that's the kind of stuff that really, I think, drains on the leader, because they're trying to hold the business model together by getting cases started on time, turning cases over, making sure your sets are sterile from SPD. You have enough people running in the rooms, running the cases, and you're not running elective cases until 3:00 in the morning. That's the addition stuff about the challenges with people are what they don't teach you. And that's the thing that I think has been the most valuable in my leadership career, is being able to relate to people and be able to talk to them no matter what the scenario is, and to come up with a solution to try and, let's get through this situation. Let's then sit down and talk about how we can make it better for the future so that doesn't happen again.
Excellent. So I get that. That's interesting. So HCA's read a report. Candidly, if you're sort of cynical, you might say that might be another way to, squeeze more metrics and more volume and more efficiency. Yeah. And now you used the phrase driving you bananas, and that's another way of sort of coming at this issue, which is the mentorship can be a wonderful release valve of the pressure and the tension, but still, can you bring us home to, like, what kind of outcomes might we anticipate putting Susan as the mentor, what kind of outcomes might we benefit from?
Well, I just think back to when I was young and first learning how to do this leadership thing, and I had no one to go to. It was, okay, what is my gut telling me to do in this scenario? And how nice it would be if you, Josiah, was my mentee and I'm your mentor. You can text me, call me. Oh my gosh, Susan, I need to talk to you about this.
Yes,
To have that in your hip pocket is to someone this is what I'm going to do. Do you think this is the right thing to do?
yes,
Because I think if they feel supported, if that person feels like someone's really there to help them make the right decisions, not tell them how to do it, give them some ideas. It's never, well, I would do it this way. That's not how you do it. Would you consider this scenario? I've seen it done this way. Maybe we could take your idea and how I've seen it done and marry it so that it's something palatable that you can live with.
right,
Because what works for you may not work for me and vice versa, which is why it's so important to know your person that you're working with, and
right,
you're kind of that rock for them.
right,
And I think this is really what's missing in leadership. And I think that's why the turnover is so horrible right now, is because we're not giving people a rock.
right,
And we're not giving them the opportunity to ask questions because they don't want to feel dumb.
right.
They don't want to feel like I can't do the job, when in actuality, they just need a sounding board.
The reputational risk, exactly.
And it's interesting, in all the places I've been, and I've been in a lot of places, I still talk to the people who've replaced me, or I still talk to the senior team, or even some of the staff nurses that I've worked with over the years. They know they have an open door policy with me, and a lot of them take advantage of it. And how nice is that, to have that relationship with the people that you've impacted and that you worked with, to know that no matter what, even if Sally Sue is in 3 different hospitals since I worked with this person, I'm still someone that they can come to. And
Mhm.
I always say, my parting words to whoever I'm leaving is, if you don't reach out to me and ask me a question, then shame on you,
Ah,
because I'm there for you.
right,
It doesn't matter that the assignment's done and I'm done being paid by your organization. I, as someone who does this for a living, can't look at it that way. It's never over. And so if somebody has a question, they know that Susan will respond to them.
yeah, right, right. Huh, interesting. So I see this as driven by many times the boss that wants a successful transition from OR manager to director of surgical services.
Right.
Now, I would think chief nursing officer says, hey, good news. I'm bringing Susan Broussard in to be your mentor. I think the OR manager is going to think to him or herself, well, I'm afraid that that's a sign of no confidence.
Right.
But it's not that, right? So
Oh,
walk me through a little bit about how you onboard your mentee and how there is that sort of safe, welcoming, as opposed to the thrust upon them kind of vibe.
well, I think my personality is a pretty welcoming personality. And I think that's the one thing that I think is important, is I would never come at it as, I'm here to help you.
Right,
You know, it's, your value is important to this organization, and this organization wants to invest in your leadership and your growth as you move from one level of leadership into a higher level of leadership.
mhm,
I look at it as, you have someone to help you if you need the help. And if you don't, then fine, then you're going to be responsible for the decisions that you make. But if you have somebody with my level of experience and level of being able to do this kind of stuff for a very long time, I would be very welcoming. I wouldn't come in, guns a-blazing. Okay, we got to change this, this, and this. That's not how you do it. You have to establish a relationship first.
mhm.
Give that person the opportunity to be a little bit afraid, because they're going from one thing to another, and they don't know what they don't know. You've got to give the folks an opportunity to express that I don't know what I don't know, and that's okay. Yes, I've been an OR nurse for 25 years. I'm just making this up. And then, yes, I've been in leadership for a very short period of time, but I do know my surgeons. I do know my staff. Well, that's a plus. All right, so let's expand upon that. And I would be asking probing questions and looking at how her day is set up, or his or her day is set up, and how we would want to structure it so that you get some wins. Because what happens in OR leadership is it just piles up, piles up, piles up, and you feel like you never get anything done.
Mhm, mhm.
And I want these folks to get wins. I want them to feel like what they're doing is being impactful to their teams, and for them to establish even stronger relationships with their teams and their physicians. And that in charge is where it's going to lead you to better metrics. Because I just really believe that if you've got a team that works under you that was willing to die for you, and I say that facetiously, but willing to really bust it for you, your metrics are going to get better.
Mhm.
I remember the last place I was at, it was an unfortunate situation where we had some um, heart team members leave, and for some, it was right around the holidays and we couldn't get folks in. So guess who's scrubbing hearts really for the first 6 weeks I was there?
Mm.
And I can remember my team saying to me at a staff meeting in January, and they were like, wow, you know, I can't say anything when the boss is in there, first assisting or scrubbing a heart. If she asked me to do something, I'm going to do it because she's walking my walk.
Right.
And not everybody can do that. I'm not saying that. That's an example of I'm part of the team. And sometimes that's things that you have to teach a new leader because they're thinking, well, I don't have to do cases anymore. But really and truly, I find, at least that's my belief, that it ingratiates me with folks a lot more because I can be one of them.
Lead by example. That's right.
And it's very cliche to say that, but I just really believe that that's been a hallmark of my success in these interim assignments, and why I still have people that reach out to me from 10 years ago. And it's just because I've always wanted to be that person that was a part of the solution, not a part of the problem. And I understand I, as a leader, have to toe the party line with what the requirements are for that given day,
Mhm.
but I still have to lead my team because, there is no I in team. I know that's silly too, but, in all of my years as a nurse, there's nothing more important than in an OR than team.
Mhm.
I can remember when I was young, we all did stuff together. We all went to each other's weddings, that kind of thing. We were all a team. We were friends. And I think we've gotten away from that a lot.
Mm. So that's interesting. So the pandemic has pushed fast forward on so many things. Let's ask you about a couple of maybe predictions. We've seen how education has been disrupted. We've seen how commercial real estate is being disrupted. Talk to me a little bit about how you anticipate healthcare and the hospital and the operating room being disrupted by the pandemic. What predictions do you have for the future?
I think it's going to get tougher before it gets easier. I don't know that it's ever going to get easier. And the reason why I say that is hospitals are under the gun even more than before. There's been, a tremendous financial impact because of COVID. And, I live in Virginia, and one of the hospitals here in Virginia, lost 87 nurses because of COVID.
Mm.
So, and I'm talking not just the OR, talking, across the board. And the scary part is now they're being replaced by travelers. And the one thing that I'm seeing the most in my travels is you get these kids that are going through Periop 101. They get their year of experience and then they start traveling.
Mm.
And this is my belief, some folks may disagree with me on this, but you travel for two reasons. You travel because you like to go different places and meet new kinds of people, or you travel because you're not the best example of an OR nurse or tech.
Interesting.
I've had, just in the last 3 weeks, had to terminate 3 contracts because they weren't performing. They sold me a bill of goods in their interview, and in reality, it didn't happen. So I think that's a challenge for organizations, getting quality people. I think it's a challenge to get to keep the efficiency when you have a very large, heavy traveler population. They're not part of the organization. They're not part of that culture. So that's a challenge for OR leadership, is getting them to buy into what you want to have happen. And that's communication. I over communicate at huddles in the morning, at staff meetings. I'm always providing education because I think you have to. I think it's going to get, like I said, it's going to be tough for a while. And I think we're going to continue to see turnover in leadership because folks are just, they're realizing that maybe that's not what they want to do. But I think there's some really outstanding young nurses and techs that maybe are next me's of the world. I try, I had a traveler that I talked to and I said, hey, would you consider being my bariatric coordinator? And she really thought about it, and she decided that she was going to apply. And she says, you know what, you're right. I do like this kind of stuff. I do want to learn. And, I had the opportunity to mentor her for a little while. And, it was neat that she came here on a travel assignment, but ended up staying and is really thriving in her position right now. And I think that's what you have to do. You have to really kind of reach out and see who are the people that you're working with that you want to see grow. And some people, they don't want to grow, and that's okay. You have those employees. I'm fine with that. But there are those employees that they're in their 20s or early 30s that we really need to take under our wing and teach and mentor and move them through. I have another nurse that is my spine coordinator in my last place. And she wants to go to the director of development program through HCA. And I said, before you do that, I gave her a list of 3 things I needed her to do. I said, you need to potentially be a clinical coordinator or a charge nurse, whatever your organization calls it, and then maybe move up into an even more responsibility. Going from a service line coordinator to the director of development program, I think is not going to help you. You got to learn some stuff, and people like to leapfrog. And I don't think we always want that to happen because everybody wants instant gratification.
Right.
And I had to toil, and a lot of the folks watching this have had to toil. And unfortunately, to get to where you're a recognized expert and doing the things, you got to toil a little bit.
Maybe sometimes it's a little slowing of it down, right?
Slow it down.
Yep.
Yes. And spell it out and give them, I always tell them, always keep a notebook in your pocket. And when I give you something, write it down, because someday you're going to come back with that and you're going to remember I said that. And I've had people tell me, I remember when you said that.
Okay, we have a few questions.
Sure.
Why don't we go first? I don't have the ability, I can't see if someone's written one in comments. And so, Sarah, can you unmute, and why don't we go to Mike Hevener first and have his question if possible?
Sure. Kind of building off what you just were talking about with COVID and all, if, with the loss of nurses and the turnover and the ever-changing environment, like every day, kind of a little bit of chaos, is it harder than the need for your services is probably higher than ever, but is it harder for them to get through to them and to get them to tackle maybe some long-range goals and such when they're just so wrapped up in the now, just getting through the day?
Without question. Speaking of my last assignment, obviously I started, in a COVID time, and my boss there had to fight division for almost 6 months. They had gone 18 months without an OR director. And it was kind of a disaster when I got there. But the thing that's most important, and the thing that I would want to convey as moving forward with potential facilities with this program, is let's look at what you're going to gain. And it's just nuts and bolts stuff, just giving them the opportunity to be able to make the better decisions, to be able to feel that they're valued. Because I think that happens a lot too. I think folks don't feel valued. They don't feel like they're in a position, they're put in this position, they're given this salary, they're given this office. Then what? They don't really have a roadmap. And I think it's really important to provide that roadmap to a C-suite or executive or whoever it is making these decisions. And it's a heck of a lot cheaper than an interim when you think about it. When I talked to my boss on my way out of my last assignment, he's like, the impact of you being here was felt in the bottom line of the organization.
Okay.
And I think that's, as you get a track record of doing this, and I do have a track record of doing this, having been in a lot of interim places, of really making that impact and teaching what I know to those who don't know it. And it's going to be a huge cost savings in the end, because there's going to be less turnover.
Okay, good questions, good answer. So let's go now to Carissa Brewster. Carissa, do you have a question?
Hi, Susan.
Hi.
How would you sell a former mentorship program to decision makers at a facility?
Well, I think it's just that. I would speak to the impact that I've made as an interim myself to decision makers on how my knowledge and the things that I've done in interim space and even in permanent leadership, what I've learned over the years, how that can make an impact on longevity. And they understand turnover from an HR perspective. And they track it every month, whether it be a staff nurse, a scrub tech, leadership, no matter what it is. And they can put a cost value into what that turnover means for an organization. And then you can look at, okay, I've gone 18 months without an OR director and the inmates are running the asylum. We're getting 5 cases done in the same period of time that we used to be able to do 20. So there's ways to prove that you got to have somebody in place managing the show. And if you do want to promote from within, you got to bring someone in to help them succeed. When I was a young director, I was at an organization, this was a permanent position. They really felt it was important to have mentors for their leaders. So for 3 months, I had a mentor. It was a leadership mentor, and they helped me tremendously. It wasn't an old OR director or anything like that. It was more of just a mentor, a leadership mentor, from just an HR perspective. But they had me think differently. And it really shifted how I lead, which has led me to doing what I do now. And I think I take that and I want to expand upon that. And I think as I move forward with this mentor program, I think that's where I would go with it, is where it can take us and the potential of keeping your OR director there for longer than the 15 to 18 months that is the average now. I think that's the goal.
Last question, Sarah, would you mind, I'm not certain if we have questions, I don't think on the chat per se, but if someone else has a question, or Sarah, do you have one?
When you come into a place, and I'm just curious if you've experienced pushback from upper leadership, or if you've had places that you struggle with upper leadership and how you've kind of navigated that relationship.
It's very interesting. It really depends on the organization, because for instance, my last place, since I'm just recently out of it, I can speak to it. And then I have some other examples too. The CEO and the COO did not get along. The CEO and the CNO were best buds, and I don't think they really understood initially why they were bringing an interim in. And so I had to tactically work with my boss, who was the COO, on how can we get some quick wins?
Mm.
How can we prove to the rest of the executive team, who there was just nothing but infighting in that executive team. So you have to be able to navigate through those waters, in addition to making some progress within the organization that's tangible. You got to show something that's tangible. And the reality is, my goal is to have the surgeons coming to me rather than texting the CEO every time something went wrong. And it was interesting, within about a month of me being there, the CEO, I ran into him in the hallway. He says, "I never get any texts from the surgeons anymore." And I said, "Well, then I'm doing my job."
Right.
And I think you have to look at the relationships with those key stakeholders, because I'm a nurse. Even if I report to the COO, I still have a dotted line to nursing. I have to cultivate that relationship. I have to cultivate relationships with the other nursing directors, because my patients are going to them post-operatively. I've got to cultivate relationships with facilities and biomed and all of the things. And that's really important, I think, because the OR touches so many different factions of the hospital. So I find it very, very important to establish those relationships as well. Who is my environmental services person? You know, if I'm having an issue, you know, are we going to do rounds? Are we going to do this? I mean, you have to know who your power players are, because you don't know who's having conversations with the rest of the executive team. And, you know, it's asking those questions and digging a little bit, and working a little harder at trying to establish relationships outside of the OR. Because, like I said, everything we do impacts the rest of the hospital.
That's terrific, Susan. So here's what I'm hearing. With Susan's program, she offers the outsider perspective, which allows for the opportunity to speak without reputational risk, and she speaks to the other stakeholders. Same benefit there. She comes to you. She has you have Susan's cell phone, and team building is the framework. So, Susan, it sounds terrific. Thank you very much for talking a little bit about your practice with us today. And like I said, the pie chart of where Director of Surgical Services vacancies go, a full 1/3 and more is to that internal nurse manager of the OR. And so the opportunity for you to have a real impact on the development of the future leader is profound. So thank you again for your time today, and welcome home. It's nice to see you at home, as opposed to working the 80-hour weeks. And anyway, without further comment, thanks again to Susan Broussard, recognized expert for mentoring the junior OR leader. And thanks everyone for coming, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks everyone.